Good afternoon, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather, and happy Wednesday to you. I'm a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and this season has had a lot of hype about the tropics. It's been somewhat difficult to predict, but we are continuing to see what could be our next storm system showing up as a signal here in the northwestern Caribbean. The next name on the list would be Helene. I honestly thought the system off the Carolinas over the weekend was going to become Helene. This would be Isaac, but this will be Helene. So we're going to talk about the future of potential storm Helene as we get into next week across the Northwest Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty safe to say that we're going to have some sort of storm formation. Now, where exactly it takes shape is still to be determined, but the odds continue to increase that something will, in fact, form in the Northwest Caribbean. And right now, I think that probably the eastern half or third of the Gulf of Mexico is most likely going to end up being our target. But we've got a lot of time before this, in fact, will actually develop and be a trackable feature. So this could change. However, I do want to give you this heads up and talk about why I think this could happen. Now, that area has been highlighted as a 20% area of possible development. It is in the hottest waters of the Atlantic over the Northwest Caribbean. Other than that, Gordon, which was a weak tropical storm, may have a shot of reforming into a tropical depression or storm, about a 60% chance. Right now, it is no longer a trackable storm as wind shear has kind of torn it apart, so there's no circulation, but it does have the chance of redeveloping into a tropical storm sometime towards the weekend or early next week. You'll see it's heading into cooler water, but really the only feature to be concerned about is one that hasn't yet formed. That is in the Northwest Caribbean. You can see ocean water temperatures from tropicaltidbits.com remain very warm across the eastern two-thirds of the Gulf of Mexico, and especially the Northwest Caribbean. And our strongest anomalies are in the area potentially where our system could develop. So that is one reason for concern, but there's many other ingredients that go into this. Wow, my graphic totally went negative on me. Earlier, let me go find you a better picture here. I don't know what happened here. All right, well, I had this loaded earlier today, and something went wrong with it, and you can see that it is missing. But the ocean heat content is extremely warm across the northwestern Caribbean and the southeastern Gulf, running several units above what we would expect even now in typically our hottest time of the year across this part of the world water-wise. And you can see we are heading in the direction of a La Nina. Now the sea surface temperature anomaly is a full degree Celsius below the average. This is across the main trackable Nino region, meaning we are likely heading into a La Nina. It's probably weak right now, but heading more towards moderate as we get to the second portion of the Atlantic season. And what that typically means, by the way, is when we are in a La Nina in the Atlantic, wind shear is typically below average. And the less wind shear you have, the more likely storms are to be able to maintain a circulation and develop and strengthen. It doesn't mean we can't get a hurricane in El Nino. It's just more common that we see more features in La Nina, especially closer to land in the Gulf and in the Caribbean and in the Southwest Atlantic. And you can see that here when we look at what the water temperature profile is like. This time of the year, we would expect to see more storms than average across the Northwest Caribbean, the Central and Eastern Gulf, and across the Western Atlantic. And this season's kind of gone that way where most of our storms have impacted land. The only one that hasn't is Gordon over here. But we had Alberto in here. We had Chris down in here. We had Beryl come through in here. We had Debbie come through this direction. We had Ernesto come up through here. So a lot more storms closer to land, which have brought a lot more rainfall to those of us in places like Florida and in the Carolinas, and of course across Texas and Louisiana last week. So the number of storms doesn't concern me quite as much as where the impacts are felt. And I think we need to get more in a mindset of it doesn't necessarily need a name. It doesn't need to be a Cat 5, although that would be the worst scenario to be a potential problem. So the concern that I've got for us coming up here is that we've got an upper level low in here and a very stagnant pattern where moisture is going to continue to feed up into this direction across the Western Atlantic. We do need some rain here across the Northeast. It's been pretty dry. We don't need it in the Carolinas or Florida. The good news for those of you cleaning up from Francine, this is a favorable dry flow for you, and I think the pattern continues to keep storms away in this part of the country. Well, let me clarify that across this portion of the country here. Keep an eye on this next one in Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama, of course. But what you can see here across the rest of the Atlantic is that water temperatures are favorable for storms, but there's just a lot of sinking motion that keeps them from developing. And as a result, we've seen, in my opinion, about a third of the number of storms we potentially could have had with this amount of heat content in place here. 1/3 of normal down in here. Now, across this area, we're running about twice as the normal across the Gulf and across this portion of the world. So there is some balance there, albeit it's weighted heavily closer to land. So across the rest of the Atlantic, all we have here is low pressure and the remains of Gordon trying to merge together. Generally speaking, this is going to be a fish storm and not be any threat to land. This may be one of our only fish storms this entire year, if you can believe that. Everything else has impacted land in one way or another. So here's a look at the European ensemble, and you will notice as we head into next week, a very wet pattern is expected across the Caribbean, the southern and eastern Gulf, and around the Bahamas region. This moisture, according to our models, tends to be leading towards the southeastern United States, whereas Texas, Louisiana, and northwest Mexico remain relatively dry. As we move further into October, after this potential storm, it remains unsettled around Florida, around the northwest Caribbean, even the central Caribbean and the southwest Atlantic. So there are signals here that after this next feature moves in this direction, we may see multiple systems developing in this area over the next 30 days. Nothing is certain at this point, but that is what models are indicating. I'm going to talk about why that is. This is the upper level chart, and it gives us phases of where there's rising air and sinking air. The brown colors indicate that the air is sinking, and that usually means minimal storm activity. Now, as we head past this week into next week, we will see that conditions become a lot riper for storm development, especially across this portion of the Atlantic basin. And what's happening is we've got this area of divergence that allows the upper level wind flow to spread out, allowing storms to be able to grow. This area has been squashed quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, with the exception of Francine. But even during Francine, it was a struggle to get anything to form in here. It wasn't until a front came down from Texas and we had a bit of an interaction between these two features when something finally was able to get going and head up into Louisiana. And that was done with minimal amounts of rising air. There just was that small window where that could happen. As we head into next week, the window opens up quite a bit here, and that's why I'm more concerned about storms developing across this region here and beyond this time frame. One thing I want to show you is what's called the Madden-Julian oscillation. This is a global phenomenon that we track across the globe. It goes through the tropics here, and we have been in unfavorable phases over the last few weeks for development, but we're heading into more favorable phases here as we head into 8 and 1, especially to see more development closer to home. And as these are not extremely strong phases, but they are phases that go into a more favorable environment. Phase 8 in particular is where things start bubbling up. And if you go back and look at history here, you will see 2018, right before Michael formed, we headed from a phase 5 into a phase 8 and then a 1. That's around the same time of year as what we're seeing now. If we look at Hurricane Ian in 2022, right before it formed, it was in a phase 8. Guess where we're heading here next week? Into a phase 8. I'm not predicting a Michael. I'm not predicting an Ian. I'm just saying that we are heading into a similar pattern where aloft the conditions that form those hurricanes may again repeat itself. And as a result, the Climate Prediction Center has on its global risk map here a 60% or greater chance of something forming at this point. I know the Hurricane Center is 20%. They need to talk with the folks here at the Climate Prediction Center, which are saying 60%, because the two should really be agreeing. By the way, there is an opening maybe for some gradual development over the main development region next week as well. Beyond that, we are not potentially finished. We could see more spots popping up here in October, albeit the Pacific side could be more active. Here's a look at the ensemble prediction for the chance of something forming. And you will see between now and next Monday, chances are pretty low, but as we get to early next week, signals start to increase for something to form here somewhere in the Northwest Caribbean or near the Honduran coastline. This would be next Monday afternoon. As we take that further, you'll see the chances continue to climb by the middle of next week, and we start to see more ensembles showing something moving into the central or eastern Gulf, and possibly even in this direction first. But somewhere in this window would be where I would expect a storm to form. We also will probably see something on the Mexican side here as well. And the reason why is that we are going to have what's called a Central American gyre. This typically shows up early in the season and again later in the season. It is an area of anticyclonic flow, kind of an upper level high here, somewhere near Central America. And you can see on the GFS model early next week that gyre begins to take shape. And what this does is it reduces wind shear and allows more of a buildup of thunderstorms. As we head into next week, this area aloft continues to be favorable for a system to carry into the Gulf of Mexico through next weekend. And beyond that, we continue to have pretty favorable conditions, maybe for more storms to form heading into October. Again, I don't know exactly how that plays out. We want to look at the steering patterns as well to see where something may develop and where it may end up going. You can see right now the remains of what should have been Helene, at least that non-tropical storm that was a tropical storm, will be left over here near New England, but there's a trough that digs down into southeastern parts of Florida into the Northwest Caribbean. There's a ridge that is going to be building into the north central United States. There's another ridge off the map here. Typically, storm development happens underneath ridges when the wind shear becomes low. So that area would be down in here, and this would be towards the end of the week into the weekend. Now, as we move into next week, that trough does lift out, and high pressure builds into the Gulf Coast region Monday and Tuesday. But that high lifts out, and there's another trough that digs down Thursday. Now, the big question mark is, where will this trough be next week? I don't know the answer just yet. But if it's over here, this system is more likely to go in this direction. If it's down in here, it could bring something into the central Gulf region in here. And there's a slim chance that if something doesn't develop very quickly or spends too much time near the Yucatan, that it finds a way to kind of hover in here, which is what we saw with Francine last week. That could still eventually get lifted northward, but the timetable would change on it. And that's a possibility as well, because what happens is this big ridge that we have in the Gulf states over the weekend is gone next week. And because it's gone, that opens up the Gulf of Mexico to potentially a storm. Here's the GFS ensembles showing some development potentially as early as Sunday or early next week, Monday. And you can see until this system forms, there's going to be a lot of spread. But typically, or I should say more commonly, we see action in the eastern half of the Gulf, maybe close to Florida here. Through next week. Here's a look at the European for the same timetable. And the European has more solutions centered on the central Gulf than it does east of Florida. However, it has several aimed at the panhandle for the time being. So right now, really still early to say. I do think Florida could get hit, but I would not leave or not shut the door on Louisiana, Mississippi, or Alabama, and maybe even the Yucatan at this point. I don't think this would go across eastern Cuba and the Bahamas at this point. I think it's heading towards the Gulf of Mexico. Here's where the winds are showing up on the European here. And again, sorry, this updated. But you can see the European takes the system into the central Gulf here for the end of next week. The latest GFS continues to show what the other GFS models have shown, and that's a system heading towards the Florida Panhandle. And the Canadian model, which is trickling in now, also in bed with the GFS, showing a system here in the Southeast Gulf, maybe aimed at the Florida Panhandle or the Western Peninsula. The Icon model is more in line with the GFS. It has this system going across the Yucatan and into the central Gulf of Mexico. You can see in the last couple of frames, though, it is beginning to bend more towards the central and eastern Gulf. Here's tropical tidbits. And this is the latest run trickling in, showing development by next Tuesday and Wednesday, and a storm which could get to hurricane intensity or strong tropical storm heading towards the Big Bend of Florida here by next Thursday night and early Friday. And some weird stuff after that. I really think the GFS beyond day 10 really just needs to be totally dropped, but that's my personal opinion. I don't know if it's going to do something like this, but you get the point here. Showing something in the central and eastern Gulf, threatening potentially Florida, especially the Panhandle, and maybe even up into the Southeast and the Carolinas, which is the last thing we want to see. Wanted to show you a couple of other models here that are trickling in. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Did want to show you guys the latest Canadian, and the Canadian's a little farther west than the GFS, but continues to show a storm in the central Gulf. This one has more of a track towards Gulf Shores and Pensacola, but does have a sizable storm, and this will probably change still. But nonetheless, showing that signal, something we need to be at least keeping a closer eye on. The Icon model develops the system farther south and west, but you can see it begins to bend it to the right here. See how it comes off and then starts to turn more to the right in the last frame. The reason why is there's a trough coming down here into the plains. And as a result, tough to say where this would land, but maybe in this direction somewhere in here. So again, central and eastern Gulf most likely to be impacted, but don't let your guard down anywhere in this region at this point until we know where it's going to form. Here's a look at the central Atlantic. This is the remains of Gordon. Here is the circulation. There's another one down in here, just a big congealed mess at this point. But these two could come together. We could see it again, have a second life and become a tropical system again. Here's a look at the Caribbean. Pretty quiet right now, even though we are very concerned about what may form in this area. Right now, things are good. It's going to be at least several more days before this gets cranking up. The Gulf looks pretty good at this point. Enjoy it while it lasts. A lot of wind shear and very limited thunderstorm activity, mainly across South Florida. Here's a look at the Atlantic side, and you can still see our upper level low here spinning, the remains of PTC 8, potential tropical cyclone 8. New low pressure beginning to form here off the Jersey shore. That's going to kind of stew around and may drop back in this area. You can see that is associated with a frontal boundary here, and so we're going to see heavy rain between North Carolina and Bermuda, and rounds of rain as well for portions of the Northeast over the next several days. Here is a look at the U.S., and very clear to see where our storms are. Nothing moving quickly, but here's the upper low in here. Here is a surface low forming in here. Here's another huge trough that will be responsible for more severe weather across the plains later today, and yet another upper level low here just off the California coast. And a big ridge building back in across this portion of the United States. Pretty common for this time of the year. Here's a look at Africa, and very quiet across the main development region. Nothing going on here. Again, that MJO phase does not favor action here. We need to get to 2, 3, and 4 before that happens. But there is a wave here that some models develop when it gets into this region, and that possibly could be future Isaac if it does hold together. Here's a look at rain expectations for the rest of today. Heaviest over the Appalachians here, maybe locally 3 or 4 inches of rain. Over eastern West Virginia, western Virginia, some heavy rain has fallen already around the Charlottesville and Harrisonburg areas. And we could still have additional rain near the Carolina-Virginia border and into the mountains. We don't need it, but we certainly could still see some more rain here. Looking up into the rest of the Mid-Atlantic region, the GFS has backed off on heavy amounts of rain for the DMV and Baltimore areas and doesn't show much. Keeps everything along and west of 81 primarily. Here's a look at the latest NAM for Pennsylvania. And around Somerset and Laurel counties, an inch or two locally, maybe higher amounts. This could try to sneak to Morgantown and Pittsburgh, but I don't want to promise you too much at this point. And then looking at the Northeast here, we can see some rain may pile up on parts of Cape Cod and maybe a little bit of rain for Eastern Mass, Rhode Island, Long Island, and parts of Jersey. But not a huge rainmaker at this point. Nothing like what we saw in the Carolinas. Finally, looking at the Western Pacific, this is very bad news, unfortunately. Multiple storms, again, affecting China. Tropical storm Pulasan just moved across Okinawa and is heading very close to where the last one hit a few days ago, near Shanghai and across Nanjing. It will not be a typhoon, but it will produce more heavy rain. But the area I'm actually more worried about is Hainan, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. We have a depression forming that's going to move slowly inland and produce heavy rain. There's another invest in the same area. And unfortunately, about 500 lives have been lost from the last system that came through here. That storm tracked through this area here and just brought incredible amounts of rain to this region. Some places seeing almost a year's worth of rain. Unfortunately, the pattern doesn't break, and we have some incredible amounts of rain coming to Hainan, to Vietnam, to Laos, to parts of Thailand, and eventually to parts of Myanmar as well, on the amounts of 20 to 30 centimeters above what you would expect this time of the year over the next week. So if you're a praying person, please be in prayer for these folks in these developing countries. Just doesn't look good. All right, I hope you guys had a great day. Thank you so much. Excuse me for watching. And if you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a subscriber. I hope everybody learned something today. I'm here to encourage you. I am a child of God and a Christian. I truly believe that this is my gift from God to be able to serve others, to help you guys be prepared for what may come weather-wise. And I am a person of prayer, and I will be praying for you no matter what you're going through in your life. I serve a great God. We all serve a great God, whether or not we choose to believe that. But the prophet Isaiah was told by God, Isaiah 41:10, that, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And to me, that's just comforting knowing that I can't get all my strength alone. I need God to help me do this. God upholds me. Uh, we all have fear in our life. We all have doubts, but those of us who have chosen the faith walk have the ability to live eternally with God in heaven through Jesus Christ and the salvation that he has provided, those of us who've chosen to believe that. And I just wanted to share that with you today, like I do every day, because that truly is the foundation that helps drive me to do what I do every day. Because believe me, getting on YouTube, I see all the comments. I know it's challenging. I have a family. I've got a busy work life. I've got a lot going on with family members. It's very easy to just hang it up and say, I'll just do it again tomorrow. But going to God has really just helped me become a stronger person and a stronger advocate for others. And just wanted to share that with you today because that is very important to me. And I really pray that it is for you as well. I will catch you all again tomorrow around lunchtime. Have a blessed day. See ya.